On blast.
This is the On Blast podcast. My name is Sheldon Alexander, and we got a little something new on the feed starting this week. Obviously, the NFL season is back, and so we are here with a brand new podcast. I don't know what we're going to call this. I will kind of steal this from Joe Budden in terms of I'll name this podcast later. But as of now on the On Blast podcast, we're talking NFL from a gambling perspective. And to do that, I brought in one of my boys, one of my friends. We go way back. My guy, Matt Russell, who is a sports betting professional and host of the Window Sports Betting Podcast. Mr. Russell, how are you doing, man?
I'm happy to be here, man. This is exciting. Week one of an NFL season feels surreal, but I'm stoked about it.
I'm happy that the NFL is here because it's so much fun. And we always used to talk a lot about gambling. You obviously know a lot more than I do. I kind of always come from the perspective of, yeah, I pay attention. Yeah, I think I know football. Yeah, I think I, research and listen to a lot of different things. But in terms of the straight numbers perspective, that's where I really wanted to bring you in. And we can have a conversation each and every week where we're looking at these games, we're talking about the headlines, but we're also, you used to educate me a lot in terms of, which ways to go and following trends and just some of the little rules that people have gambling wise. And that's kind of what I want to bring to this podcast platform in terms of, even if you're going to make your little pro line picks, be educated on it a little bit, have a little bit of knowledge supporting when you're dropping your money down, however much that happens to be, which hopefully is your lunch money.
Absolutely, man. And listen, I've been doing this for 20 years. And so my podcast is, I'm doing it for 20 years. For the first 10 years, you're just learning, right? It's this education that there's no classes to go to learn how to sports bet, right? But I love sports and I'm competitive as hell and I like making money. And so, as a 20-year-old kid, I figure out I can bet on sports and I'm like, this is amazing. Like, this is way more fun than just being a fan, even for my, like you said, sort of $2 pro line per night or per week. And, but then you look for content to sort of help you learn about it, right? And what people don't realize, it's so much more than just picking games. And like you said, knowing football, knowing basketball, knowing hockey, etc. It's so much more than that, right? And if you think you have no idea. But, if you want to come and sort of learn about the industry and how deep it kind of goes, that's what I do.
Yeah, I totally love that. And what we're trying to do here is kind of blend the both worlds, right? And kind of have that discussion where we're adding more education to the, I trust Brady and Belichick. That's one of the things I would say all the time is kind of like one of my gambling.
Not a bad strategy.
But you know what I'm saying? But just kind of trying to add a little bit more depth to that. But in terms of the window, because the other part too is we want to get people, and if you want to know more information and more of a deeper dive, the Window podcast is incredible. Where would people be able to find that from you to get a little more insight on a daily basis on the gambling world?
Yeah, wherever you get your podcast, man. Apple, Spotify, Google, like all, the whole crew. Just type in the Window Sports, right? Just to be sure. And then, follow my Twitter feed at MRussAuthentic, MRUSS Authentic. And you can't miss it.
One of the things about this season is just fans in general, right?
Yeah.
There's no fans in stadiums. So normally when we're talking gambling lines, there's normal trends in terms of, what's the old adage? Home team gets 3 points.
Yeah.
Does that still play the same now, even though there's no fans?
Well, listen, that's exactly
there's some fans in some places.
Sure, yeah. So 25% here, like Jerry Jones is just shoehorning people in. Like, he doesn't care if there's like bodies in the aisles. Like, it doesn't matter to him. You know what? And you said it correct, man. It's an old adage and it's an antiquated adage. And it is for a couple of reasons. So for one, it isn't 3 points. It was sort of more like 2.5. And you might be like, how does that really make a difference? But trust me, it does. But the thing is, because there are key numbers, and this is sort of literally, advice piece number one, is that there are key numbers in football, right? And it's not that complicated, right? The key numbers are 3, 7, and then to a lesser extent, 6 and 10 and 14, right? For obvious reasons, these scores go up by 3, 6, 7. And so roughly, I think it's like, actually last year for the first time ever, games landed on 7 more than they did on 3. Normally 3 is the most like popular or most often final score spread, right? And so to say just blindly that it's 2.5 doesn't really account for how valuable 7 is, right? And obviously nowadays teams are more likely to score touchdowns than they are field goals, whereas before, people just wanted to, coaches just wanted to put points on the board and that kind of thing. The other thing, and maybe the most important part, is last season, for the first time ever, the average margin of victory was 1 point for the road team. So if you added up all the scores of the entire league, all 200 and whatever games, 256 I think it is, and the road team outscored them by 1 point overall. And so that shows that we are moving to a road team sort of equality here that we've never done before. And now you're taking out sort of the noise element, but are you, because they're going to allow...
They're going to pump in noise.
They're going to pump in noise, right? And if that's really the only issue when it comes to fans, because what else would fans have anything to do with the game, right? Like home field obviously has a lot to do with travel and all of that kind of stuff. But nowadays, man, travel's so easy for these guys and the hotels are so easy and it's just such a business trip for them that they're just in there, out there focused. And so good teams aren't getting upset on the road the way they used to because the advantage just isn't there. And I'm not sure, especially this year, but like even going into this year without all of this stuff going on, I'm not sure there is even such a thing as home field advantage.
Do you know what's so funny about that? So obviously in preparation for the pod, I went through and did all my picks. And normally, and for the record too, just so people know, we're going to go through, talk about some headlines and stuff, and within doing that, go over some of the lines. But my overall picks that I'll make this season, I'll keep a running tab for the whole year on Instagram or somewhere or on our On Blast page. But in doing that, when I wrote it out, I realized I'm taking a lot of the road teams. And I was writing that out, and it was one of those things where I reminded myself, I'm like, oh yeah, home field advantage isn't as big of an advantage normally. Right? Much less now. So that kind of makes sense. It's so funny you mentioned that, but it makes so much sense, right?
Well, and that's straight up too, right? That's before we even get into spreads. And so once you start factoring spreads in there, like when I'm going through all the teams and doing previews and stuff and researching, right? I'm looking at their spread record from the previous year. And by and large, it's pretty close to 8-8 for every team, right? It's either 9-7, 7-9, 6-10, 10-6. There's very few outliers where one team went we went 12-4 against the spread because the market catches up and vice versa, right? And so I'm looking at this and I'm like, all of these teams who are 10-6 against the spread were 6-2 on the road against the spread. And 4-4 at home, right? They're making their hay, so to speak. I mean, assuming, they as if they really care necessarily, but from a betting standpoint, right? A team literally the teams that you think are really good home teams, oh, Seattle, man, gotta bet Seattle at home. Don't do that. They are way better against the spread on the road than they are at home. The Saints are one of the 5 worst teams in the last 10 years against the spread at home, right? 2 things that you would not think of given the sort of hype about those home field advantages.
I like it. Home field advantage might play a role in straight up, but against the spread, I got you.
Yeah, well, like I said, even straight up, right? Now it's an average loss over the course of the whole thing. So do not be afraid to take road teams, especially this year.
Yeah. I got you. So as mentioned, week to week, we'll go through kind of the NFL headlines. We'll talk about it from a gambling perspective, how, injuries or results might lead from one week to the next. But because this is the start of the season, we're kind of just going to go through the biggest storylines of this upcoming season. And along the way, I'll throw you some of my picks, what I'm thinking at certain of the lines that are out here. And kind of get you to be like, no, that makes sense, or just tell me I'm an idiot. Either way, I'm good.
Sure, man.
So here's the thing. NFL headlines, I think it's kind of obvious what the biggest headline I think of this season is so far, and that's Tom Brady moving to the Bucs. So from a gambling perspective, how do you feel about what they're calling Tampa Bay? Are they what they would call a public team in terms of a team the public really thinks is going to be good, but not really as good as the public thinks?
I think Tampa Bay is going to be good, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's for the reasons that it's for different reasons than people think, right?
Okay.
And so if you're out there going like Tom, he's got weapons now, you know what I mean? Godwin, Evans, like, you know, Gronk's back, like a couple more tight ends, right? And it's going to be some high flying shootouts, right? The way that Tampa Bay's games were last year. But what Tampa wants to do here is they want to be more conservative and more careful with the ball, because Tampa was losing games, not because they were a bad team, because they had a good offense and they had a sneaky good defense of which they return pretty much everybody from, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't think of Tampa Bay as having this good defense, but Bowles, who is the coach of the Jets, who got that coaching job because his defenses in Arizona were so good, right? Yeah. He's now the defensive coordinator with Arians again, right? So they've taken that sort of team that, you know, the coaching tandem, if you will, from Arizona, those good Arizona teams, right, before it fell off, and they're now in Tampa. And so that defense is really good. And so what they need is a guy to not throw 30 interceptions.
Jameis with this 30 for 30 season, right?
Exactly, right? And so, like, they'll take a couple TDs off if you're willing to take, I don't know, 20 less interceptions, right? Because Tom's not going to throw 10 interceptions, but he's probably not going to throw 35 touchdowns. Like, I saw a market about Tom Brady touchdown passes that was like 32 and a half or something like that. And I was like, under that, right? Because that's just not who Tom is right now. And the reality with Tom specifically is that the analytics have not been good over the last 3 seasons. And that includes a Super Bowl season, right? Yeah. He just isn't very good. He can obviously, you know, control the ball, like he's not loose with it. And that's the idea, right? So for me, you know, it's not all that exciting because it's not like, oh, fade Tampa, like it's going to go badly. But it's also not go full bore into Tampa because the value's already gone. But where the value might be this season for Tampa, and I know neither of us are big totals guys, but unders in Tampa Bay games might be the play at the start of the season, including this week against New Orleans, another team that's sort of reputation-wise is of Breeze and the offense and moving the ball. But the reality is over the last couple of years, that team has transitioned to have a better defense than they do an offense. And again, when we're working with public perception, right, we need to sort of sift through what we kind of just think when we close our eyes versus what's actually happening on the field. And so Tampa and New Orleans under is sort of a rare total that I'm going to be playing this weekend. As far as the line is concerned, it's dropped from, you know, 4.5 where it opens. But if that number drops down to 3, and again, we get into a conversation about key numbers, New Orleans -3 for me is a target where I would place a bet on the side here. Otherwise, I'm staying away from it because there's a ton of uncertainty, and I'd rather just take the under because I think both D's come to play.
So here's my thing too that's super funny is I see the line Saints 3.5, right? And my old rule with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady was I would always take the points if they were dogs by more than a field goal. That was one of my, you know, because we always have these like baselines for rules.
Sure, so once every 2 years that they would be dogs by more than a field goal. But yeah.
Exactly. It would happen every once in a while. But I'm saying it was one of those things where as soon as you see it, it's like, yep, taking the points. Like not even, wouldn't even waste a breath thinking about it. But in this instance, I'm kind of looking at, and Bruce Arians is still a great coach, but obviously he's not he's not Bill Belichick, right? But when I see the 3.5 points, that extra half point is something that makes me take the Bucks. And I'll take the plus points just because I'm going to trust Tom Brady. I think that if we think overall about, okay, well, there's no real continuity here because obviously he's in a new offense with, you know, all these new players around him and they haven't really had time. There's a lot of whispers about them actually working behind the scenes probably when they shouldn't have been or NFL sanctioned.
It's not even whispers. It's flat out like Tom's posting Instagram stuff like, yep, still playing out here. And people are like, Tom, get inside, man. You old. Come on.
Right? So I don't know. I just feel like Brady, this is obviously like a revenge tour for Brady. Like he's really focused. And I think in this instance, I'm willing to take the extra half point, but that's just me here taking the Bucks at plus 3.5 on that game. But let's switch gears a little here.
Sure.
On the flip side from Tampa Bay is obviously the Pats. Cam
Yeah.
Newton, we know, has come in as a starter. As much as this might be a revenge tour for Tom Brady going to the Bucs, Bill Belichick's probably here thinking he's got something to prove as well. There's been a lot of talks about, are they going to tank the season, which makes no sense to me. But you bring Cam Newton as a starter. How do you see Bill Belichick being able to work with Cam Newton and the Patriots prospects this season? And I say this from a gambling perspective in terms of with Brady and Belichick, you knew that Brady would take care of the ball. You knew Tom Brady wasn't going to lose you games or lose you spreads, right?
Exactly.
With Cam, it's kind of a different look, but it's still the Patriots model. Which side of the fence do you fall on here in terms of trusting the Pats from a gambling perspective this season?
Listen, you hear people talk about these days, and I don't know if it goes back to like Jay-Z or whatever, but people talking about being in the lab, right?
Yep.
No one in the history of the world has been in the lab harder than Bill Belichick this season, right? He's in there. He's got potions going. He's beautiful finding things on the mirrors. Like it's a scene in there, and he loves it. He loves this. And that's why he, let's just say it, drove Tom out of town. Because he's like, I'm kind of bored with this. I'm getting sub-average, below par, whatever you want to call it, quarterbacking from a legend that I have to stick to. And I'm going to be a hard ass about this. And Tom, go find somewhere fun to play. Take your shirt off in Tampa Bay. Get loose. I'm going to be in the lab here. And now I've got this dual threat quarterback who he's got to be just drooling about the stuff that he and Josh McDaniels can do, right?
Yeah.
And I think about the game. Remember when Tom got suspended? And he was out for 4 games, super ridiculous suspension. But he's out for 4 games, and Jimmy G comes in. And Jimmy G gets a win and another win, but he gets hurt. And then it's Jacoby Brissett time on a Thursday night game against Houston, who is a pretty good team, right?
I definitely remember this.
Bill's in the lab. He's like pulling out a drawer, and he's like coming out with a Dead Sea Scroll with a game plan from like 1971, like his old Army or Navy or whatever it is days. And he's like, we're just running the ball. It's going to be sweeps. It's going to be quarterback around the outside, like that kind of. And that was with Jacoby Brissett, who's not even that good of a runner, right? And now he's
third stringer, yes.
The third stringer, because he didn't really want Jacoby throwing the ball because it was rookie Jacoby Brissett. I'm not even sure veteran Jacoby Brissett you want throwing the ball. And so now he's got this guy who like people don't want any part of in the open field. And for me, those two guys are having a full season are going to have some stuff cooked up. Right?
Yes.
The issue, again, and it's very much similar to the Tampa Bay thing, it's different because the Tampa stuff I actually think is more predictable with regards to, like, Tom's level is going to be about here, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like how you said, like, don't turn the ball over. And the defense is what the defense is. With the Patriots, right, the Cam thing, it could go, a couple of different ways here. And with the opt-outs, right, for those who didn't, been living under a rock, right, there's a bunch of opt-outs. No team was hurt more by COVID opt-outs than the Patriots and specifically their defense, right? No Hightower, no Patrick Chung, right? Veteran guys. And so now you're looking at this going like, is that defense going to be that top defense that it was last season? For me, I go Bill in the lab. He's a defensive guy even more than he is an offensive guy, right? And like, every time you see a player leave New England, they're way worse, right? Like Jamie Collins is the best example.
Yeah, but I was going to say the other thing too about Belichick's defense. I feel like it's been years and years and years of, the defense isn't that good. And then the season starts, and the one trend you see is a defense improves as the season goes along. But that is that was the case in the
Super Bowl season. Yeah, it goes from like meh or even like terrible to like really good because he's the best coach. He coaches guys up. So you might look at that roster and be like, I don't know any of these dudes, man. And it doesn't matter because Bill's going to coach him up. Now, has he had the time to do so far this season? I don't know. So when we're talking about this week 1 game, right? Laying 6.5 against a Dolphins team that really showed something last season that beat the Patriots in a game the Patriots needed to win. And by the way, the Dolphins spent the most in the history of sports on free agent signings this year. $250 million on veteran guys. So they were the youngest team in the league last year, just running out randoms. And they weren't like top pick young guys. They had the most highest percentage of non-top pick guys that they were running out. So now they've got all of these guys, including Kyle Van Noy, former Patriot, and they're loading themselves back up. And so I don't know what to expect from this Dolphins team that I think is really well coached, right? Because they turned things around big time last year. Like they went over their win total, right? Their win total is 4.5. They won 5 games, and they were getting trucked in the first month of the season.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because one of the things I wanted to talk about as well is this perception of teams tanking. And the Dolphins last year were the team that, there was a public perception that they were tanking, and that was a theme early on. As you look for trends, some things that people do is identify the really good teams that you want to bet on, and then identify the bad teams that you want to bet against. And so when this perception's out there that the Dolphins were tanking last year, people are just going against them week after week after week. Right. Then they slowly start to show promise. And even if they weren't winning games, which they did start to win games as well, but they're covering spreads, because some of those spreads early on were super ugly, right? Yeah. As we head into this season, I think that team's probably the Jags in terms of a team that people are talking about. Oh, moves have been made. They're just kind of giving up. They're trying to tank. Do you buy into that as well for the Jags in terms of, should we be looking at that as one of the bad teams to bet against, or not so much? Yeah. So, I mean, this opens up a huge sort of Pandora's box, right? Because first of all, fundamentally, there's no teams are tanking, no players, I should say, are tanking. No coaches are tanking. That is not a thing, right? No. All of these guys, whether they're young, right, and they just got in the league, or whether they're old and they're hanging on for another right, another $1 million contract next year, every one of them is putting in effort on tape, right? Because nothing's guaranteed in the NFL. So of any league ever, right, you're going to get 100% effort, at least at the start of the season. Now, when we get to the end of the season, things can get a little squirrely here. And now, you mean those late game, or that late season trip to Miami might be a little, well, or just like last year, I mean, we're going way off topic here a little bit here, but the Browns phoned in the last month of the season last year because they thought their coach was a complete idiot, and they probably weren't wrong. And so, right? And so last year, like you said, you've got the Dolphins. Everybody thinks they're going to be terrible, but even then, the spreads in the first couple of weeks weren't outrageous, right? It all sort of, the spreads became outrageous, which is why they were able to cover them, right, going the rest of the season, because, we knew they would be pretty bad, but not that bad the way they were in those first few games. But, point is, if Jacksonville is that team this year, why, right? And so for me, it's not every move is created equal, right? And so we hear about Leonard Fournette getting cut, and we just go, another step in the tanking. Yeah, they're done. Like, they really don't care. But if you look at Leonard Fournette's numbers, and anybody who plays fantasy, who's ever thought about drafting Leonard Fournette or trading for Leonard Fournette, knows that he's not a very good running back, right? He's, his average of 3.7 or 2.7 yards per carry in the first half, we can see him just running directly into the offensive line and falling down. And let me ask you this question. How many tackles do you think Leonard Fournette broke last season? A big dude, famous at LSU for just running guys over. How many tackles do you think he broke in an entire season? Entire season? Yeah. I don't know. I'd put it at like 15 or something. I don't know. He broke four tackles the entire season. 4. So cutting a guy, he's got a big name. That doesn't mean you're tanking. He just stinks, right? And so, they had to trade Yannick Ngakoue, their defensive lineman, star player. But, he demanded out, and you go, okay, see you later, right? They had to trade Ramsey last year. They let go Boye, their other corner, in theory a star corner, but he was getting picked on all season last year. So are they really any further, worse than they would be normally? Now, problem is, right, week 1, you go, okay, how do we take advantage of this? And it's a pretty big line in week 1 against the Colts, where the Colts are 8-point favorites. Problem is, I really like the Colts this year. I don't really want betting against the Colts at 8, though. That's a ton of points for a team on the road. People, and it's not necessarily, a hidden secret necessarily, but teams that go to
Florida in that first week, right? They're not used to the heat and the humidity, right? Like it's a tough game for them. And so you're telling me 8 points for the Colts, who, by the way, in week 17 went to Jacksonville last year, when again, Jacksonville should have been tanking that time, right? In week 17 last year, and Jacksonville wiped the floor with them. So again, different team, right? Like Phil Rivers now the quarterback, all of that kind of stuff. So for me, it's unfortunate because sometimes you're sort of, you have to.
You're clashing styles. You're clashing.
Well, I was going to say, like, sometimes the schedule doesn't work out for us from a betting standpoint. And in this case, I would love to bet the Jags big against a team that I didn't like. There's plenty of teams that I don't like that would be giving them 8 points in week one, right? Like if they're facing the Texans, for instance, right? The spread would probably be 8 still, and I'd be delighted to take the Jags in that case. In this case, the spread's too high, and I'm still going to bet the Jags, but it's not going to be a major play for me, and it's because it's 2 teams that I want to bet on. And you talked about, finding teams that you think are going to be good, that you want to bet on, and find teams that you think are going to be bad that you want to bet against. For me, it's kind of the opposite. I need to find the team that are bad that I want to bet on, because that's how I get the value, right? Like when everybody thinks something about something, right? Then going the opposite way is always the right move, right? So when I look at the good teams in the league this year, I go, well, what's their fatal flaw? And we'll get into some of these as we sort of go through, but I go like, what's the flaw? Why can I justify betting against that team given that people think so highly of them? And it's the same way with a team like the Jags.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's super interesting looking at the Jags and how things have played out, but it's such an interesting insight into the public perception of it and how that just moves things, because you're totally right. Fournette gets waived and it's like, oh no, they're tanking. Well, and it's like, well, really, if they could have traded him, if he had that much value, they would have traded him.
Yeah, so, when the coach stands up and goes like, we couldn't get anything for him, that's a clue. He stinks.
A team that doesn't stink is obviously the defending Super Bowl champion, Kansas City Chiefs, right? That's a pretty good squad. We talk about continuity being super important, and definitely these guys are returning what? It's like, what's the number? It's like 20 of 22 starters are returning from last season.
Yeah, they had a couple of opt-outs, right, that sort of hurt the team. Canadian boy, right, Duvernay Tardif. But that's, on the offensive line and a guard, and for as good as he was, and he's had up and down seasons, to be honest with you, so it's not like he's some sort of consistent Pro Bowler, as much as we sort of like him as we're required to as Canadians. Not necessarily a huge loss from that standpoint. Damian Williams, right, he opts out as well, and they replace him. They sort of pre-replaced him, right, with LSU running back Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who, of course, is just fantasy darling at this point, right? Just going for absurd amounts of money in auctions and high in drafts. They traded Freeland, I believe, Fuller, and Breland is starting the year suspended, if I'm not mistaken. And so that's going to hurt the secondary, which is a unit that, other than Tyrann Mathieu just being all over that place, is, a squad that isn't good, let's just say, right? And that defense is considerably worse if Chris Jones isn't there. Of course, they gave him big money in the offseason. And so it's tough, right?
We're talking about, obviously, KC, and their Super Bowl opponents were my San Francisco 49ers. And there's normally, I like to talk about public trends. That's where I kind of want to keep bringing up these public themes and having you poke holes in it. That's kind of what I'm doing here. It's kind of where I see this pod going, right? But one of the things people talk about all the time is a Super Bowl hangover. And one of the teams that make the Super Bowl struggle the next season. So if we don't think that's going to be the Chiefs, does that mean we think it's going to be the Niners this year?
We kind of do.
It's okay. Man. I can take it.
Okay.
It's okay.
So we talked about how I'm looking for good teams that I can bet against and sort of why I would want to do that, right? And so for the 49ers, so much is predicated on their run game, right?
Yes.
Because I don't know what your feelings are necessarily on like a full confidence with Jimmy G if he has to go sling it out. That shaking your head doesn't seem like you do. And so if that on days when that gets shut down, right, then that's a really big deal to make Jimmy G throw it. And so normally, obviously from a fantasy football standpoint, people talk about wide receivers and running backs. And if, this guy's out, like this team's in trouble, blah, 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 blah. For the 49, normally that doesn't matter, right? For me, normally, unless there's like a full scale, like Eagles season last year where they just had no wide receivers and like you and I were in the slot for the latter half of the season. And it's one of those type of situations. Unless that's the case, like it doesn't really matter. But for the 49ers, the way their offense works, where it's so predicated on yards after catch and having different sort of, reverses and end arounds and that kind of thing. Like you think Deebo Samuel, how many carries he gets, just sort of swooping around through the backfield. It really matters the health and sort of the quality of the wide receivers, right? And they let Emmanuel Sanders go, and they tried to replace him with Brandon Ayuk, but he's hurt. And he's out, and Deebo's out. And so now you look at it and you go like, what are we doing here as far as our wide receivers? And they led the league last season in percentage of yards after the catch versus yards before the catch, right? Yeah. And so they essentially throw short and run farther than any other team in the league. Part of that, of course, is George Kittle, and there's nothing wrong with George Kittle. Relax, Sheldon. He's going to be fine. He's still playing. You good.
I'm not worried about Kittle.
And so you go, okay, well, if we can, if a team stops the run against them and has Jimmy G relying on receivers who we're not all that sure about, that's going to be a problem offensively. Defensively, right? We went into that Super Bowl and people were talking about how it's like great offense against great defense. And for me, I was like, I'm not like it's a good defense, but we're not talking, but it felt like a little forced from a narrative standpoint.
Yeah, so because do you know why though? Do you know why that was? It was because people were still like, even though it's a completely different defense, but they were so used to the Niners defense from when they made the run prior with Kaepernick. Right? True. With Patrick Willis, like that defense, the Smith boys on the front line, like that defense was so lights out. And I think going on this narrative, I know we're talking about a lot of different narratives and how that's silly the public narratives are, right? Yeah. But people think of that. They're like, oh yeah, I remember San Fran was good. Like a couple years ago, their defense was lights out. And it's like, yeah, but none of those guys are still on the team anymore, right? Their defense is good, but it's not that good.
Plus, listen, you and I are veterans of the television business and writing teases, right? And so you got 2 weeks to write a Super Bowl tease. Are you writing it about Patrick Mahomes versus Jimmy Garoppolo? Or are you writing it about Patrick Mahomes against a really good defense? Right? And so the defense gets pumped up that way because there isn't anybody, it's not going to be Patrick Mahomes versus George Kittle, even though George Kittle's the best player on that team, right? The poster is going to be sort of, unstoppable force, immovable object, or however that phrase goes. Never get that right. So I look at the stats for last season, and what it comes up with is they had a lot of sacks, but it was a lot of third down sacks, right? Yes. And so they weren't all that good getting pressure on first and second down, and they weren't all that good in the red zone. When teams got to the red zone, they had a high frequency of touchdowns relative to the rest of the league, let alone the best defenses in the league. So when I can sort of see little holes that I can punch into that I can't see with Kansas City, I mean, the defense obviously with Kansas City is a hole that I can see punched through, but like a Baltimore, like some of these other really good teams, somebody good has to be not that good this year. And it's almost like a process of elimination too, where you go, okay, it might be San Francisco. And of course they caught a lot of teams by surprise too last year early on, and they won a lot of close games, especially division games. They're both Arizona games were tight. Both Seattle games were tight. I don't recall what the Rams games were necessarily.
They were close too.
Yeah. And so, there's that sort of regression element that you can find with San Francisco that, again, they're not going to be 6-10, right? But they're in a tough division and first place schedule now this year. So there's a lot of sort of sketchy things there. And when we're talking about this week, I love the Cardinals +7. And I think that's going to be a circa million pick for me.
Same. I got to be honest with you too. And, the Niners, when I look at that, 7's just too many points. Like I can't take this will lead into our next topic, but there's certain quarterbacks that I don't like taking a spread that's too high. And Jimmy Garoppolo needing to cover 7 points, I'm not about that life. You asked me how like confident I am in Jimmy Garoppolo having to go out and sling the rock. Not confident at all.
Right.
Basically, my guy, game manager, and if you watch their offense last year, it was run the ball, run the ball, run the ball, then play action. So, and the dudes, when Garoppolo would have good passing games, it was because those guys were schemed open, right? So Shanahan's great at play design, great at drawing up, different run plays, but then the counter to some of those run plays, you're scheming Emmanuel Sanders open or Kittle open on those deep balls. But other than that, it's all just dump passes. So when I see 7 points against a Cards team that should be more improved and a Cards team that played the Niners tough last year, I like the Cards and the points for sure. Definitely like the Cards and the points.
And worth mentioning two things really quickly. That number was 7.5, right? That number has dropped to 7, and it's dropped onto a key number, right? So when a line moves, it's one thing if it goes from 9 to 8.5. That doesn't really mean all that much other than sort of teaser liability. When it goes from 7.5 to 7, or we talk about the New Orleans, Tampa Bay, if it goes to 3.5, 3, that means something, right? And last season, for as good of the record that 49ers had, they were 9-7 against the spread, right? And 6-2 on the road. So we talk about like a team that got there against the spread record, which isn't all that good at 9-7, right? And again, that's what we're talking about when we're talking about betting against a good team. We're betting against a good team that, not a good team that put up a 13-3 record. We're talking about a team that put up a 9-7 record under the context that we're working with. And they did that against the spread without being a Super Bowl participant the year before. Yeah. And then you throw in the 6-2 on the road, which of course means that they were 3-5 at home, right? Now, if you're betting on the 49ers this week, you're betting on a team that was under 500 under the circumstances that you are betting, right? And that's what you have to remember, right? These records are what they are against the spread versus straight up.
I like that. And so as we were talking about Jimmy G, and I said it leads into our next topic, another one of these narratives that I always look at gambling wise is trusting QBs. There's certain QBs I like to roll with, that I trust them to cover, a touchdown spread. And there's certain QBs that it's like, nah, right?
Yeah.
Shouts to Mitch Trubisky. But in fact, right? So when I look at, you look at it from that factor, there's a lot of old trusted QBs that I would normally be okay with. We mentioned Brady, but Drew Brees, Big Ben is back, Aaron Rodgers. Those are guys that normally when I see spreads, they're only favored by like 3, only 3.5. Ooh, I would take that, right? I would take that probably up to 7. But these guys are all at varying older ages.
For sure.
If you had to pick one of these guys that kind of would be the dude that I probably shouldn't hold in the same light as I have in previous seasons in terms of riding with them when it's an easy low spread, which one would you take? Which one should I be kind of hesitant on or push pause on? Brady, Breeze, Big Ben, Aaron Rodgers.
Well, we talked about Brady and Breeze from the context of like, it's not about them with those two teams, right? Yeah. It's about they are now a complementary piece to their defense, right? And for the other two guys, it's very much similar in that the Steelers have a really good defense and the Packers now have a really good defense. So as these guys get older, it's almost like this bell curve, right? Where, remember in Brady's first Super Bowl, it was like, man, just throw it like 6 yards. We'll get it down the field. Vinatieri will kick a field goal. Let's play a 17-14 game, right? Like we'll stun the Rams, who were the high-flying show. And then Brady sort of gets better with his career, and now it becomes a Brady's amazing type of thing. And now it's back down to the other way. And it was the same thing with Roethlisberger in his first Super Bowl against the Seahawks, right? Yeah. Like rookie quarterback, like just don't kill us out here. Between these 4 quarterbacks, which is the one who had radical reconstructive surgery on his elbow last year? And that's Ben Roethlisberger. Right? And so for me, I go, okay, is that something I want to rely on? And without preseason, I don't know if you would have even played in the preseason.
Yeah.
It's kind of the secret. Like nobody's really seen Ben rip it, right? Yeah. And I'm sure the surgeons did a great job and that he's going to be fine or whatever, but he went into last season and he couldn't throw. Now, obviously that was probably because he was injured before the season even really started and that it eventually just popped in game 2. Yeah. And you go, well, the defense is there, but the defense That team went 8-8 last year with Duck Hodges as the quarterback. It was because the defense was scoring touchdowns and turning ball over on defense.
Yeah.
And that's not really something that's replicable on a year-to-year basis, like that level of scoring touchdowns.
Yeah.
Now, so, it's sort of the opposite of like the Jameis Winston Tampa Bay thing, where it's like, okay, we're not going to get all the turnovers instead of we're not going to give all the turnovers. And so Ben just has to make up for that.
Mm-hmm.
But they seem to be sort of fine with rolling with him for another season, whereas the Green Bay, sometimes you have to look at the draft and sort of what teams do and go, have that inform like what's really going on. Like we try to read the tea leaves a little bit here.
Yeah.
And isn't it strange that they've already anointed, and used a draft pick? Like it's one thing that the story, right, is, oh, Rodgers going to be mad about this. Like, oh boy. And it's like, yeah, that's fine, but that doesn't really help me. Like if people tell you that like Aaron Rodgers is going to be out for blood this year and like that's why you're betting on the Packers, no, because Aaron Rodgers is a dude who's always out for blood. Like you can't go higher than 10 you can't turn it up to 11, right? Like that's not how this works. And so the fact that not only did they opt for a guy who they want to be the future, presumably you wouldn't draft him that high if you didn't.
Yeah.
Not only that, but they also use that pick to not help
Aaron
Rodgers in any way, right? And so you go, they know something that we don't know. And they're also, and this is no news to anybody who sort of follows this stuff, but the Packers are a massive regression candidate this season. Like that 13-3 record that they had last year. And listen, I took advantage of it. I got away with one. I had NFC North Packers. I had like NFC futures like for them, and like they had no business being 13-3, but they were. I cashed the ticket, and then like I Homer Simpsoned into the hedge after, right? Like
and
I
then
was
the
like,
playoffs,
I'm out of
but
here.
then that playoff matchup,
it came out, But
we knew that, right? Like people who were paying attention to it, exactly what you're saying, right? If you watched and you paid attention, you knew it was kind of not. I don't want to say smoke and mirrors, but once they went up to the Niners, it was like, okay, well, we know this Niners D-line, it's a wrap. It's a wrap at this point. He's going to have no time to throw. It's a wrap. And it's interesting because it kind of sums up exactly what we're talking about here, right? In terms of the reputation of it all. I remember leading up to that playoff matchup against the Niners last year, and there was so much talk about, oh, what's going to happen? And I was very confident, and I was telling people about it, but they weren't listening to me because I'm a Niners fan. And I kept saying, listen, it's not because I'm a Niners fan. Like I would tell you that I'm always freely willing to admit when something is fandom. That's why I don't really bet on the Raptors, right? Like I don't bet on the Raptors. I stay away from that just because I'm like, whatever. But if something is about fandom, I'll let you know. That was about, no. The pass rush is going to just crush Aaron Rodgers. And if he has no time, they have no offense. And they got shit kicked.
And we had the sneak preview, right? That Sunday night game earlier in the season. And it was like, what's going to be different? And nothing was different, really.
But that was one where it's exactly what we're talking about. People were just riding, and even the spread in that game, and people were just riding with the Packers just because, oh, Aaron Rodgers, right? Like I'm betting on Aaron Rodgers.
Aaron Rodgers plus the points, right? I'm in, like that kind of thing. We all succumb to it. And you make a good point about the biases, right? Yeah. I talk all the time about the podcast on the podcast about, listen, like we all have biases, and that's fine as long as you're self-aware and you can acknowledge those biases going in. Let the money drive your bias and not this like fandom thing that I don't love.
So here is a perfect example of that, and it's kind of our last headline, so to speak. But another thing is hype teams, and there's always a team getting all the hype heading into the year. If you remember last year, it was the Cleveland Browns. They were kind of a team where everyone's talking about, oh, Super Bowl hopes. Forget about surprise team. It's like they bypassed being a surprise team. It's just, nope, these guys are Super Bowl, not favorites, but contenders, which ended up being far from the truth. This year, the team that's getting a lot of hype is the Buffalo Bills. I even have trouble saying that sentence out loud. But do you believe in the Buffalo Bills? And with that said, how's that affecting lines as I look at them as 6.5-point favorites against the Jets?
As far as the Bills are concerned, like, I mean, it's tough because when you're watching that playoff game last year with the Bills and watching Josh Allen just kind of throw the ball over his head randomly, you're like, that's not my quarterback. right?
Right.
And so, but there's a ton of talent there, and their defense is very good. The Stephon Diggs thing I think helps because that's an offense that needed a wide receiver.
Yeah.
It's so tough. Like that's the one I don't love. I'm going to rely from a division standpoint on the Bill Belichick revenge train. I will say this week, and we're going to get to this in a little bit, talking about a certain thing called Survivor.
Yeah.
I like the Bills this week. I don't know about going forward. Like I'm going to need to see a little bit more of it, but I like the Bills them, this week.
-6.5. You like them?
Well, I like the Bills this week
to win
times the fact that I think the Jets are going to be the worst team in the league. I think there's value on the Jets as the worst team. If you find a Jets like worst team in the league market, I like that more than I do the Jags. Again, relative to the odds, because we're always talking about price, right? The Jags are literally like 2-1 to be the worst team in the league. And like, listen, that's fair. They're going to be bad. They're not going to tank. They're just going to be bad. Whereas the Jets aren't going to tank either, but they're going to be bad, and they might even be worse. Adam Gase is a horrific coach. So, yeah, at 6.5, like that does feel actually a little bit light for me against the team that if I'm a little high on the Bills and I'm a little down or a lot down on the Jets, sort of by definition, that's one of the favorites that I like this week.
See, that is pretty good because, again, I need to shift my narratives away from, well, it's anytime I see the Buffalo Bills favored by more than 3, I'm always like, whoa, let's slow down here. And as you mentioned, and now you're adding in also the Josh Allen factor. Now I'm talking about a quarterback. Do I trust him to get the cover, pretty much a touchdown? And you look at all these things, and then you got to take that to the flip side. Okay, so why are the Jets going to cover a touchdown?
Right? Well, exactly. And you bring up the point you brought up earlier, right, about trusting a quarterback to cover a number.
Yeah.
And like, again, I sort of think about it differently. I look at it going, I need a defense to cover a number.
I like it.
Basically, what we're looking for from a favorite is to build a lead through a half and 3/4 and then shut it down. And so that's what I'm looking for to cover a spread, because they could cover this spread 17-10. They don't need to score 40 points, but if the Jets aren't going to score, I'd be willing to say that the Bills are probably going to cover the spread, right? Like I think the Bills get 7. I'm not saying they're going to shut them out necessarily, but like if they keep it down to 10, 13 points, like that to me is the key to covering big numbers, especially in the NFL.
I hear you. So, that kind of is how we're going to do week 1 in terms of going through a bunch of the storylines heading into the season while mentioning the games and the lines. Normally, I think going forward, we'll go through some of the headlines of the week, some of the results, obviously, and I'll basically hand over a couple, maybe let's say 4 picks that I have and kind of just get your thoughts on them from week to week basis. But one of the other things that we want to do here, well, first off, I'll mention my full picks. If you're ever looking for that, if you want to, and hey, just for entertainment purposes only,
sure,
do it that what you will, but I'll put out the information. It'll be on my Instagram page or on our On Blast podcast page, which you can find somewhere before Saturday. I guess if I'm doing the podcast every Thursday, I guess it's got to be up. I got to have my picks by then. So somewhere soon after that, by Thursday night, let's say that much, right? You can find that there. But one of the things we also wanted to throw out week to week on the podcast is something we're going to call the sucker bet of the week.
Absolutely.
Would you first off like to explain exactly what we mean by a sucker bet?
Yeah, there's always one, and there's often more than one, that looks a little too good to be true, right? Okay. And sort of how, do you define that, right? And for me, and I'll give everybody sort of a tip here. Grab the app. It's a free app, Sports Insights. And what that app has, it's very basic, but it shows you the betting percentages on either side of the game for that week, right? It doesn't show you how much money is being spent on either side, which is actually a better indicator of what the sharp side is, so to speak, who the big money likes, obviously. But it gives you a good idea of sort of what the super popular pick is that week. And of course, super popular, usually means overvalued, right? Whether we're talking about, restaurants or cars or neighborhoods, we're also talking, anytime you put a price on something, which is what we're doing here with sports and sports betting, something can be overvalued, something can be undervalued. And so this app shows you the percentages. And a lot of times it's like 60-40 type splits, but there's always one or two games that are in the 80%, even sometimes 90% range. And those are the ones that not only do you, I'm not even going to say you want to bet against necessarily, but you just definitely want to steer clear. And they're definitely ones that you were going to put on your parlay, right? Whether it's your pro line, like win by 4 parlay, or whether it's your point spread parlay. And that's the one that you're sitting there left on Monday or Sunday night going like, like that one killed me. That was the one. Like I thought I had it. Now, you might be wondering, are there anything like that this week? Well, it's a little bit trickier, right? Because we don't have last week perception, right?
Yes.
So bettors love to just sort of follow the
factor.
Yeah, what they've seen most recently is how people bet, right? And so we don't have that. We only have like who was in the Super Bowl last year, who, and sort of literally like maybe week 17 we can recall. So there isn't anything that necessarily jumps out, but there are 2 games that I want to talk about when it comes to this category. Okay. And they're both primetime games because obviously primetime games, most eyes equals most bets, right? And you have 2 games here where people love one side and don't want anything to do with the other side going into this season. Sunday night game, right? Cowboys and Rams. I'm as high on the Cowboys as anybody else, right? Like I feel good about them this season. I've got them winning the NFC East. Grabbed it when it was plus money. It's now minus like 135. So value city there. My job is literally done when it comes to the Cowboys. May sprinkle some for the NFC, to see if they actually can be that team, right? What could possibly go wrong betting on the Cowboys long term, right? That being said, I'm not the only one, right? Like this isn't like a secret thing. When you see a line for their division move the way that it has, obviously a lot of people love the Cowboys. And so that line is 3 right now at the LA Rams this weekend. People do not love the LA Rams. They are spending almost $30 million on players who are not on their team anymore. That from a building your team standpoint, which is, again, a thing I factor in sort of big picture with these teams is, are you good at running your organization? And so like, that's kind of a flaw when you give up that much money. And so, again, not a secret. People do not love the LA Rams, but are the LA Rams a bad team? I don't think so. Right. Like they can, and I don't know that necessarily the Cowboys can do all that much to stop them offensively, so we might have ourselves a bit of a shootout on Sunday. And so if you can grab the extra 3 points, I would wait, right up until kickoff, because I think we can get 3.5. I think we can get 4 with the Rams. But long story short, you're probably looking to put those Cowboys on that parlay, right, to finish that off, right? I'm going to be 4-0 after Sunday afternoon. I'm going to ride into Sunday, and I'm going to hit that parlay when the Cowboys kill the Rams. The Rams stink. The Cowboys are coming for it this year. Be careful, tread lightly. The other one, the Monday night game, the Steelers, right? Big Ben is back. That defense combined with Big Ben, sleeper in the AFC. Here we go. Against the Giants, Daniel Jones, gross. Their defense, terrible. That number has moved from 3 to 4 to 5.5.
5.5.
I'm seeing some 6 right now in some spots. And I'm going to tell you, I would be surprised if we don't see 6.5, maybe even 7. 7's such a key number that like if it hits 7, it's going to be gone in a second. Because even the people betting the Steelers at -3, 3.5, 4 have to come back on the other side at the Giants at +7 and try to hit a middle, which of course means winning both sides of a bet. And so that seems a little too easy as well, and a little too everybody on board from a public standpoint there as well. The difference being, at least this line has moved, right? At least it's moved with all the money. So that the sports booker, at least at that point, is at least saying, like, we might have made a bad line, we need to adjust. When it comes to the Cowboys and Rams line, that line hasn't moved basically at all. Like, I'm looking at it right now, and it opened like 2.5 and is now 3. Like that's essentially negligible at that point over the course of 4 or 5 months. If that number was like shooting up, then we would see something. But to me, there's an artificial level there at 3 where people are betting the Rams +3. And if you're doing that, like, to me, that's the sharp side in this game, because Dallas getting 61%, so it's not, we're not talking like an 80% type of number. That's going to rise though by the time Sunday rolls around, because a lot of people, right? Even if you left it off your parlay, you're still going to make all these bets during the day. You're going to win, you're going to lose, however you're going to do it. But you're going to bet the Sunday night game. You're going to bet the Monday night game. You're going to take the favorite, especially really hyped favorites. So it's sort of a dual, like, tread carefully sucker bet of the week, and it's primetime action this week.
Yeah, I was in on the Giants at +5.5, and I'm going to be in on the Giants as that line continues to rise for sure. Just because for all the things that you just listed, but also I just think the perception of the Giants last year being like super trash, where the reality is they haven't really even played with all of their offensive guys at the same time yet. Right.
Yep.
So you're coming into this season, who knows, but I just think that the perception of it all from the public standpoint of the Giants, it's just not, it doesn't meet with what reality is.
Yeah, and I don't even really love the Giants all that much, right? I'm just out here saying, like,
I just don't think they're that
fishy,
bad,
man. Yeah, this line is fishy when it comes to that sort of thing.
I like that you brought that up, because that hits on like a couple of other narratives of gambling narratives that I always try to remind myself of. One is that the gambling line is not based off of what is going to happen. The gambling line is based off of trying to get money on both sides of the number.
Yeah,
right. So
public perception or creating value for the sports book too.
Yes. Well, I mean, this has been a lot of fun, man. And I think that in terms of, just getting a grasp of what we're trying to do here overall, and just talk some football, talk some numbers, kick around some ideas, etc. I really think that that's just kind of, I think that's been a solid first go here.
So I'm excited for this season now, man. We are going to chop it up every Thursday, and we're going to make some money. I'm pretty sure we're going to make some money along the way.
But you mentioned you're in Vegas right now.
Business trip.
Yes, a business trip. Give me a little more insight. What's going on there? How are you doing so far? First off, the time zone difference right now. This is real early for you, so appreciate you getting up with us here.
No problem, man. Like you, I'm based in Toronto, so this is a business trip for me, right? It is, and the core reason, I should say, is to sign up for the Circa Million. So a lot of people ask me, and this is kind of a fun story, and I'll sort of throw it back to you here at some point. But I go to the airport yesterday, and of course, a lot of people ask me, like, are you going to have to justify why you're going down, right? Because everybody sort of thinks essential workers can cross, and that's only on the ground border. And I'm like, no, like, it should be fine. Like, I'm going to say I'm going down for business, because I essentially am. This is by no means a frivolous, fun trip. Everybody's in masks. It's kind of a rough scene. Though people are undaunted here from a sort of being in the casino standpoint. But so, so people, you're going to have to, tell customs, like, how are you going to explain it to customs? And I was like, I'm just going to be straight up with them, right? Like, this is what I do. This is my business, blah, 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 blah. So I get to so first of all, the airport is empty, like marching my way through security, marching my way through customs. I get to the customs guy. He asked me, like, what am I doing? Blah, blah, blah. I explained to him the contest thing. And he's like, hold on a sec. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I love sports. I love the NFL. I love betting, like da-da-da. And he literally grabs from on his side of the ledge a handful of Proline tickets. And he's like, see? And first of all, I'm like, why do you have a handful of Proline tickets? Like, if they're dead ones, like, throw them out. There's not that much going on. Like, did he stop to get some early, the early lines on Proline? Do they even come out on Proline on Wednesday? So he's literally, like, waving these tickets, like, in front of me. And because there's nobody in line, we then go into a 15 to 20 minute conversation. And so, I'm literally standing there, and these people are, like, starting to line up behind me. Like, I'm creating the lineup, not because I'm getting grilled about, like, my nefarious moves, but because he just wants to talk sports betting. And he literally takes my card that has, like, the window and everything,
all the info,
and is like, and I'm like explaining to him that I have, and this is probably good for your viewers as well, before the sort of restart of all sports happened, I just
Yeah.
did a couple of evergreen podcasts, essentially kind of intro to sports betting type things, right? Like
Okay.
where to bet, how much to bet, like what you should be doing, sort of what your expectations should be, and ways to get free money from some of these sports books that offer, different bonuses and stuff. So
Mhm.
I'm literally going through my own feed to try to find the date for him so that he
Yeah.
can write the date down and be like, okay, July 18th. Okay, yeah, I'll check that out, blah, blah, blah. So you just never know. You just
You
never
never
know. Like
know.
when you're going to just get into a conversation about sports betting, even with a guy who's just waving a handful of Pro Line tickets at his customs desk in the airport. So just thought that was funny.
That's
And,
hilarious.
I mean,
Let's
sick.
go, man. I enjoyed it, man. I enjoyed the conversation, trying to mix in some storylines. What do these things mean to the numbers? What's the public saying? What are the sharps saying? Trying to help people make some money, as you just said, man. That's kind of the goal of this. And as I said, I still don't have a name for this podcast. It's just on. Remember, the key here too is this is the On Blast Podcast Network. There's a bunch of different other podcasts under that network, whether it's Wrap It Up, our Raptors post-game show. We got a Ball on Blast, which is our weekly NBA talk. There's also a You Killed It podcast, which we do as well. And now this, I don't know, I'll name this NFL podcast later. That's what we're going with as of now. Shouts to my guy, Joe Bunn, always dropping gems to the young podcasters in the game. So, yeah, Mr. Russell, again, give us where can people follow you? Can they follow you on like socials? Where can they find the podcast? Let the people know.
We do have one more thing we got to talk about, man. We do have one more thing.
Oh.
And you talked about we're going to make everybody some money on this podcast.
Oh,
make
yes.
some money on the Window podcast.
Yes.
We are going to make ourselves some money, or at least we're going to try to. So I talked about the contest, the Circa Million contest, 5 games against the spread every week. Well, as part of their rollout of this new hotel and this new sports book, they've also created the first, and dare I say, legal survivor pool. Right?
Yes.
And it's a high roller survivor pool here in Las Vegas, $1,000 entry, same rules as you play in your office pool survivor. I won't tell anybody that you're doing survivor, that it's not super legal. This one's straight up legal, all legitimate. $1,000 entry, $1 million up for grabs, right?
Okay.
And so what we're doing over at the Window podcast, the Window Sports Betting Podcast, any sort of combination of those words, you'll be able to find it on Apple, Spotify, Google, all of the random podcast providers out there. It's wild. Like I see some of the places where people are listening to it, and I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing. At any rate, what we're doing this year is, I got my own thing going with the Circa Million, but I wanted to do something for the entire podcast, sort of as a whole from a content standpoint. So what I did was I'm entering the Circa Survivor here for an $1,000 entry. And what I've done is I've made one share, or I should say 1/18th, different shares, essentially 18 different shares available to listeners, guests of the podcast. We're calling it the Friends of the Window entry, right?
Okay.
And you, being a friend of the Window, are in for 1/18th, right? Which means you are in for 1/18th of the fee, and you are in for 1/18th of hopefully $1 million when we figure this out. And so what is going to happen here is listeners, and again, past guests and hopefully future guests, come on the podcast. They get assigned a week, right? So you might get assigned, I haven't done the draw, that's coming out on Friday's podcast. You might be like week 8. And so if we even get to week 8, week 8 is your pick. And you have to come on the Window podcast, and you are responsible for your 1/18th share of the intellectual property. You have to make that pick, right? So the draw is going to be wild because it's like, do you want to be 17th, right? Knowing that you probably won't even get to make a pick. But if you do, the $1 million is going to be riding on your shoulders. We're going to sort of work as a team, have strategy throughout. And so I'm in for half, right? Because it's my deal. But we've got 9 other shares sort of doled out throughout the sports betting and the Window podcast community. So we'll sort of be able to talk about that each week too, sort of on this podcast with you going, hey, like, who would you pick this week if it was your week? Who would I pick if it was my week? That kind of thing. Like, what are the good choices for Survivor? Because I know a lot of people out there are sort of, in Survivor pools, right? it's sort of the gateway drug to the betting scene in a lot of ways at the NFL.
Correct.
And so, yeah, so you and I and a handful of our friends over at the Window Podcast are doing that this year. It's going to be wild. As far as other social stuff, follow me on Twitter. Mentioned it earlier, at M for Matt, Russ for Russell, Authentic. You know how to spell authentic. Russ Authentic on Twitter. I give out a lot of plays just on Twitter because I get this podcast out in the morning. And so right now, right, it's talking about NHL, NBA, you know, like what happened last night. Shout out to the Raptors +3.5. Thank you for that, guys. Rolling with the Celtics in Game 7 because I've got a series bet on them overall. But, you know, so we talk about that. We talk about bankroll management and all of that kind of stuff. Different theories, a lot of what we talked about today and beyond. But then on Twitter, right, like there's other stuff that pops up after, for instance, the podcast gets published. Baseball, I do a lot of baseball on Twitter because I don't have time to cap baseball in the morning before the podcast comes out, right?
Yeah.
So I do the podcast, I send it out, and then I go, okay, like what do we got for baseball? And I'll have, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 type of plays for baseball out there. And any other sport, really, right? Like tennis, I threw some stuff out earlier this week. It basically broke even. Think we won a unit. But all from a recreational standpoint, right, we got some good sweats out of tennis. So Russ Authentic, and you can find all of, you know, obviously I tweet out the podcast each day. But yeah, subscribe, rate, review the podcast. Come check it out, man, because I sort of call it hashtag our little corner of the internet. Because,
I like it.
You know, to sort of be a little bit brash, a little bit brazen here. We're winning money here. We crushed the NHL. We crushed the NBA bubble. And so I'm just sitting here over in my little corner of the internet, just handing out winners to people. And like, it's funny because like in part you sort of expect like the droves to come flocking and being like, you know what I mean? Just how well it's gone. But it takes a little while to sort of for people to recognize. And so, you know, pressure's on. We just keep doing it. But you're not going to find anybody who knows more about this stuff and who's more educated about this stuff and these sports than I am when it comes to sports betting and stuff. And so that's what we do every day, man. Monday to Friday. We'll have a Sunday show talking about the circa million picks, like the 5 big picks. And anything, you know, from a line standpoint that moves on Sunday morning that maybe becomes a little bit more attractive. But now that we're getting into NFL season, we're going to talk about NFL every day to some degree. But yeah, the Friday show will be the one that's legit, and then the Sunday morning one as well too. So come check it out.
I like it, man. I'm in for sure. And if we were doing a Survivor pick week 1.
I said, man. I mean, part of it is, and we are, because I've made myself responsible for week 1.
You're doing week 1.
Yeah, because I don't want whether it's
so you don't have to give away your Survivor pick then. Don't do that.
It's fine. Listen, it's not rocket science, right? And so, you know, I made myself responsible week 1 because if we're going to lose week 1, I rather it be on me than like one of my, you know, guests one of my, you know, listeners or something like that, right? Like it would suck if like, hey, this is Sheldon Alexander, he's making a pick, and you're like, meh, and then you lose, and it's like, oh,
and everyone's like, screw you.
Like, yeah, right. Like I feel like I've made the listeners of the podcast enough money over the last month or two that I can take a loss here. I'm also the most invested in it, being a 50%, you know, shareholder here. That like it's going to hurt me way more than it's going to hurt you, type of thing. And so, but you know, it does, even week 1, it does require some planning. Right. And so you do have to look ahead to different parts of the schedule. And the interesting thing that the circuit did this year is you know how I said it's 18 weeks. Well, anybody who knows anything about NFL knows that it's a 17-week schedule.
17-week
But
season.
what they did is they're adding Thanksgiving Thursday as its own week, which means you only got 3 games to choose from, which means you only got 6 games to choose from. So there's a cluster of teams there that we got to avoid because we got to keep those available, right? So Baltimore plays Pittsburgh, for instance, which isn't necessarily a game I want to take on Survivor. So now we're looking at the other 4 games, and it gets really, really dicey from there. So point is you do have to look ahead a little bit, but I don't plan the whole season out, and I'm not in charge of half the season from a, you know, which pick type of thing. But we're going to talk about that from a strategy standpoint. And when I have the guest on, right, like they can run by me like, hey, I'm thinking this team, and, you know, is there a reason not to? And we'll sort of handle that. But for this week, I think it's the Bills, because I think this is the best chance you're going to get at taking a team that was a playoff team last year, is expected to be a playoff team this year. Is it great to say I'm rolling with the Buffalo Bills as somebody who's been, lived in Toronto for the last 30 years? You can imagine that that's probably not like a comfortable thing to necessarily say. But if we took those jerseys off and we put them on someone else, you'd be a little bit more comfortable with it. And I know what I'm getting out of the Bills, whereas I don't really know what I'm getting with the 49ers. I don't really know what I'm getting with the Patriots, especially relative to their competition. And I don't want to bet the Thursday night game on this, right? We'll save the Chiefs for a team that they have plenty of easy teams on their schedule where it's just going to be a walkover week and make it easy on other people, that are picking for our entry. So yeah, we're riding with the Bills this week and just need them to win. Don't even need them to cover. I probably won't even bet the spread because I'm that invested in sort of us getting to week 2 that it's almost like the money's not, even if they cover, like the money's not worth it. Just like they could win this game by 50 points and I would be like, okay, that's fine. Like I don't even care that I didn't win any money on it. Like I'm just glad we move on to the next round.
Just win, baby, win. I like it.
Exactly.
I like it. And that's what we try to do each and every week here on this podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Again, my name is Sheldon Alexander. You can find me on Twitter at Shell Alexander, on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander. And like and subscribe to the podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, just search On Blast Podcast. Same thing goes for YouTube. Like and subscribe there as well. Appreciate all the subscribes and likes. And Mr. Russell, thanks again for tuning in. And I close every podcast on this network with the same slogan. I used to pray for times like this to rhyme like this. This is the On Blast Podcast. As always, unpolished and unapologetic. Until next time, see ya.
On blast.